Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Adult Chair on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and I am thrilled to be here once again with Michelle Chalfant.
I've been running ragged for a little bit, but I'm glad to be back in Nashville.
Running ragged? We're supposed to. It's middle of summer at this point. We need to be relaxing. You need a mojito and an umbrella.
That would be nice.
Well, we are talking about motivation today. We're talking about specifically the challenges that come with motivating for change inside ourselves. Before we dig in and I introduce our fantastic guest, head over to theadultchair.com. You can learn more about this show. You can subscribe for free by signing up to our mailing list. And you can find us anywhere the finest podcasts are served with a quick search for The Adult Chair. You can always join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. We would love to hear from you. Dr. Ted Klontz is a psychologist based in Nashville, Tennessee. He is here today because he is a noted pioneer in the development and application of tools and techniques for helping people change their troublesome behaviors. Beyond that, he's an author, having written or contributed to 6 books on behavioral finance. He's co-founder of Your Mental Health and the Financial Psychology Institute. He's a published researcher, speaker, trainer, and facilitator. He travels the world working with corporations and professional athletes and entertainers and high-profile families, couples, and individuals. And finally, he has arrived, having worked his way up to this very show. Ted Klontz, welcome to the Adult Chair.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
I feel like we're walking. When Michelle called me, she said, we've got Ted Klontz. He's going to join us on the show because you should know she talks a lot about you quite fondly. She says, we had this conversation, me and Ted, and I have to share this with everybody. It was fantastic. Michelle, do you want to introduce this concept?
Well, I'm just, again, so happy to finally have Ted Klontz on our show because I'd heard about him for the last few years and finally took some trainings with him and then spent half a day with him about a month ago when you said yes to being on the show, Ted. Thank you again. He's just a brilliant teacher. And I remember when I asked you in one of the trainings I recently took, I asked you, and I'm going to please put it in your words, but I said, what exactly do you do for people? Because I watch you work with all these different people and something about bringing what's on the inside out.
To explain this, I came up with a metaphor the other day that I think is understandable and very succinct. The way I see myself, and parenthetically, the way I believe that people could be best worked with, is I'm a bit of an incubator. So if you can imagine holding an egg in your hand, that egg would represent people who need to change. And my job should be to offer the same kind of support and warmth and protection while the person is in the process of changing, as a mother hen would, sitting on her egg. And we know that if the egg is appropriately incubated in its own time, a new form of life will begin to emerge, a very unique form of life. And I believe that all of us have that in us. The typical therapeutic approach has been, unfortunately, I'll take this egg, I'll crack it, I'll add some heat to it, salt and pepper, and, it's delicious. It does change, but it's a whole different thing if we allow that new life to emerge in its own unique way. So that's really my approach, and that's what I do. I'm an incubator. I was talking to my 6-year-old granddaughter who asked me what I did, and I said, I help people who get stuck. And she says, oh, so you're a tow truck. And
I like that one even better.
That's not exactly what I meant, but as I thought about it and as I pictured it, that's sort of what I do. And then try to help them figure out how to keep from running in the ditch again, or when they run into the ditch again, they can maneuver themselves out of it. So my job is to hopefully help folks learn to help themselves in terms of building their own sense of autonomy and their own sense of capability, and empower them to know that they've got everything that they need inside of them already. They just need some help sometimes to help them find that.
I love that. And knowing the client base that you have, I mean, you work with all kinds of people, whether they're famous or not famous. And what do you find? I think I asked you this question in the past, but is there a common theme that you find, regardless of their economic background, Do we all want the same thing? Are we all looking for the same thing, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think basically I have taken the liberty to condense what I believe people's needs are into about 6 things. They have a need to belong. They need to have a degree of autonomy or to feel like they can make their own choices. They need to feel safe and secure. They need to be able to express themselves in a way that's uniquely and genuinely and authentically theirs. They need to have a sense of purpose and also a feeling of connection. So to some degree, that's what everybody is looking for. And those needs vary from time to time during our lives and also, during the day. And the most important of those I have found is a sense of belonging. The quote, really famous people and the very wealthy people, what they're aware of is that people love them and accept them and adore them for who they appear to be. But it's like a football player putting on a uniform. That's not who they really are. They also have a desire to be authentic. And I was sitting beside someone in New York the other day, and they were asking me, what did I do for this particular client that I was sitting beside? And I said, my job is to help her insides, who she intends to be, manifest itself here at this dinner table. And that's essentially what I see my role as, is that person who we intend to be every morning when we wake up, a better mom, a better dad, a better husband, a better wife, a better daughter, a better son, all those roles that we play. How can I get closer to who I intend to be by my external behaviors?
So for all of our listeners that don't have the pleasure of working with you, what could you offer some of our listeners? How would they get some of their needs met? How do they help to become what's on the inside and bring it to the outside? What can you offer them?
It's such a fascinating question too. Just an observation before you start, Ted, because this is, we think about this question about working with very famous people, celebrities who, I really resonate with your comment that people love them for who they appear to be, but that seems to be just as much of a challenge for, me. I'm everyday Joe, just trying to get my kids to school. And people's observation of me is not always what I feel like on the inside. It seems like a very consistent sort of human, slice of human nature.
You're absolutely right. The folks who have become the rich and the famous, it's much more apparent what their persona is or what they present to the world. But we all present, we all put on our suit, so to speak. And there's the further away that suit is from who we feel like we are on the inside, the more distress we feel. And most of us carry around this secret fear that if anybody knew who I really was, they would hate my guts and that they wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. And we walk around with that fear of discovery. Like maybe, will today be the day that the cloak slips a little bit?
Sure, it's like imposter syndrome.
Right. And we all have that to some degree. And there's something called Grossman's Law, right? It says for every complex problem, there's a simple, easy to understand wrong answer. So I will preface it, what I'm about to say with this. But what I find the most, and the most challenging, and the place that we very quickly go with clients, or I quickly go with clients almost right away, is there are parts of us that we refuse to accept, we refuse to acknowledge, we fight against, we wrestle with, we go to war with. For example, if you called and said, I don't know what it is, but I'm terribly anxious. And the traditional way of fixing it would say, well, Michelle, let me give you 17 tips on how you can reduce your anxiety.
Right.
And that's really about suppressing it or repressing it or medicating it or whatever we do. And what I would ask you to do is to pretend like your anxiety was an entity of some kind. I would ask you, is it human? If so, is it male or female, or is it amorphous? What color? What's the kind of energy it would bring? And imagine it being a part of you that's trying to give you a message. And the message is something that it believes you need to hear because it's concerned that your life is at stake. And turning towards those parts of ourselves that we tend to not like very much, there's also the very parts of ourselves we're hoping that nobody else sees. And the more we can make peace with those parts, the less we are afraid that somebody's going to discover it, because we've already discovered it. It's the difference between somebody telling me my pants are unzipped and me discovering my pants are unzipped. Mm-hmm. And that's that's the idea. The more I can make peace with these various parts of being human, the more relaxed I feel, the more integrated I feel, and probably the best thing of all is the less judgmental I am of other people who are displaying some of those things. A really good way of recognizing the parts of myself that I haven't dealt with are the parts of other people that I can't stand, right? Mm-hmm. Can't stand the gossip. I can't stand the person who won't speak up. And, it's the part of me. There's a part in all of us that should speak up and doesn't. And the more familiar and comfortable and at peace I am with that part, the more I get to know him or her or it, the less judgmental I am of myself and thus of everybody else too.
We just talked about this, Pete. Does it sound a little bit like last week's show or the week before show?
Yeah, I'm dutifully writing notes here about my pants being unzipped. I may have gone off the thread. To me, it really boils down to this idea of the embarrassment and the fact that there is so little safety when I feel like I'm embarrassed, and it's because not that embarrassment is necessarily so bad, but my emotional reaction, the inside reaction to being embarrassed about, let's just say, someone else discovering my pants are unzipped, feels exactly like I just looked up and a piano is falling off an apartment building at me. That is the same sort of emotional, I'll say chemical, knowing nothing about chemicals, reaction that I feel like I'm having, and it's like false fear. Right? I mean, I may be spinning a little bit here, but how do I move past false fear?
First of all, I don't know that the fear would be false. And if I were working with you directly right now, Pete, what I would say is, well, let's take a look at that fear. Let's take a look at that piano falling and tell me what happens next. We'll find out what's there. And nobody really knows what's there, but you may discover something about that that would be really helpful to you. And over time, in those kinds of situations, you'll be less embarrassed because you've already been there, right? You already know that part about you. And you've made peace with it. You've forgiven yourself for being human. And so as people would bring that up, you go, yeah, that's a part of me too. The thing that really bothers me a lot is we'll take someone like a person who acts out, some celebrity, let's say, who acts out in a way that's very racist. And what we do with that is if it's the wrong guy in the wrong place who says the wrong thing, it's pretty much like we kill him. We crucify him. Mm-hmm. And sometimes careers end because of those moments. All of that, to me, is a projection of our own racism that we haven't really faced. Born in all of us at a very subconscious level, 150,000 years ago. By the way, our brain has not received a software update in 150,000 years. So 150,000 years ago, if a person looked different, they smelled different, they dressed different, they ate different food, and they talked a different language, it was not good news. And that part of our brain still exists. And it still is there whether we recognize it or not. And if I can understand my own racism, if I can get comfortable with it and notice it when it comes up, I'm, first of all, much more likely not to act out on it. And also to see somebody else doing it as somewhat of a human thing, rather than see them as some kind of subhuman part of the species who needs to be destroyed.
That ends up applying, it sounds like, not just to issues of race, like looking and smelling and speaking a different language, but behavior.
Absolutely. I once said a few years ago, I'm not Adolf Hitler, but if I look closely in the mirror, I could be. Because we all have inside of us the natural element for most human beings is to never kill another one of its own species. That's programmed into us, except for one moment in time, and that would be to protect our family. And if I had a perception that my family was at risk, I could do as dastardly a deed as any other human being possible because I'm a human being. Doesn't mean I will, but if at least I know that about myself, I'm less likely to be caught by surprise by it. One of the things I hear over and over and over again is, I'm afraid if I got really, really angry, I would kill somebody or I would hurt somebody. That's why I don't get angry. And it's like, well, the problem is the anger slides out in all kinds of unrecognizable ways, like sarcasm or put downs or the Rodney Dangerfield kind of expressions. And I think that those kinds of things are, in their own way, as dangerous as somebody who knows that they could potentially hurt somebody under certain conditions.
That's fascinating, and it makes me reflect on sort of our cultural appreciation of symbols that represent that part of us, and if we look at movies and comic books and all these things, as putting ourselves in a mirror, then you see the scale of from American Psycho and a complete sociopath, and appreciating that versus appreciating, here's what anger looks like when we really go crazy. It's called the Hulk. Bruce Banner was a mild-mannered scientist, but if it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. These are the symbols that we appreciate.
Yeah, and you raise a really good point, Pete. Actually, what those movies, the popularity of all that, is a way for that part of us that we typically don't pay any attention to manifest itself. Now, inside of each of us, there's a Superman, there's a hero. Mm-hmm. Inside of each of us is a villain. And the nice part about that is, in an hour and a half, we get to visit for an hour and a half, and then we go home saying, "Oh, that was a really good movie," right? But it is a way for that part of us to express ourselves vicariously, if you will.
It almost seems like it could be sort of a numbing effect.
Absolutely. We're in our culture, we're really into numbing. If I said to Michelle, I'm really depressed, if Michelle were a typical helper, basically what she'd be trying to do is help me get out of my depression. She would do things like remind me, well, go for a walk, Ted. Or, if you get up and count your blessings, or write down a gratitude list, help other people. All those kinds of things we know help physiologically change the brain chemistry. But the best thing for me might be for her to walk with me into my depression, saying, tell me more about it. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what the thoughts are. But in order for her to do that, she's going to have to be familiar with her own. And if she's not familiar with her own, then she can't afford to have me go there. So she'll do whatever she can do to stop me from going there.
Well, it leads me to sort of, putting myself in a position of those listening to this show. Let's say I have become expert at numbing out. Let's say I become expert at sort of existing in this sort of low-grade depressive state, but manifesting something different, the suit that I wear. But I am aware that inside I have this degree of, say, self-loathing or sadness or depression, this natural state. How do we walk into that? What does that really look like?
There's a thing of, well, you can always get help and ask people who can help you go there to help you go there. I also believe that to a significant degree, me simply saying to you as your friend, or if you would happen to tell me, or maybe you don't even tell me, but what your habit is to turn towards it and essentially say, what is it that you want me to know? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the poet Rumi or not.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
He has a wonderful poem called The Guest House. And you can Google that, and up it pops. And, this is a guy from, 1,500 years ago who was suggesting that instead of turning away from all those things that come to greet us on a daily basis, that we welcome them, that we imagine that they show up on the front door totally uninvited in many cases. It might be a joy or a sorrow or a loathing or a fear, whatever. And essentially what he says is invite them in, set them down, and thank them for coming that day, and find out what it is that they're wanting you to know. And that's what I would say, that's the approach. And my experience has been the more that I do that, the more I turn towards those things which early in life I learned to turn away from. Because if a little kid's 3 or 4 or 5 and they're feeling sort of sad and depressed, the typical American thing is, well, come on up. Let's give you a lollipop. Let's go outside. Let's throw a ball. But do not go there. I mean, that's the message. And so what we do is we sort of rip that part out of our consciousness, stick it in this bag behind us, and we don't know what to do with it. So if you and I were talking as we are right now, I would, if nothing else, imagine that this is a guest, someone who's very concerned, an entity that's very concerned for your well-being, because its well-being is based on you staying alive, and it's trying to tell you something. And the message comes in one of 2 forms. It's either something that's very young, that's sort of afraid of the dark, and there's really nothing to be afraid of, or a very wise part. And we never know what it is until we get in there and listen to what it has to say.
You reinforced that in one of our trainings, just turning toward. And I've heard it before, and that has changed me in such profound ways, and my client base for sure. And you're right when you said, I think you just said this, that, typically therapists, we're here to, let me fix you. When people come in with an issue, we're trained the opposite. My whole practice has changed over the last few years of learning another way. And then you reinforced all of that, which is really just to look and I think I said it on another show, actually, invite that part of us to tea and sit down with that part. And we learn so much from that part that is giving us that anxiety or the depression or the I'm not lovable feeling or whatever it is. It really helps us to feel whole, which I think that's what people are looking for. We're looking how to love ourselves. We don't know how to do it. We can't fall in love with ourselves if we are disowning all of the parts that scare us, right?
Absolutely. And
yeah.
You sort of painted the picture there very well, Michelle. The more comfortable I am with the weirdness of being a human being, the less it matters that other people see my weirdness as a human being.
Right.
So if they notice something about us, then we go, yeah, that's part of who I am. Now, we either say that out loud or we just say that to ourselves, as opposed to, oh my God, they've seen something that I haven't seen yet, and they can't possibly be true, so let me counterattack them, or let me go into my shell, or whatever it is. It's just a loving acceptance of who and what we are. I was talking to a mom whose daughter was 6 years old and she was still sucking her thumb. And I actually witnessed this. They were at a table at a school fair, and the woman sitting across the table said, "You're a beautiful little girl. If you would quit sucking your thumb, you'd be even better."
Oh, that makes me heartsick.
Well, and her mother said, I believe she's beautiful, whether she's sucking her thumb or not. And since I'm her mom, it's okay. Right.
Ooh,
and that's
that.
the kind of relationship that we can have with ourselves. She's sucking her thumb, and actually what they found out later is she has a sensory distortion, so that it's one way for her to manage her anxiety. It's also one way for her to know that she's actually in touch with herself. Like she's touching the soft palate, which has a direct connection to the brain, which in our earlier years give us the most comfort. So, that whole thing has led to, okay, let's get her some help so she can feel less anxious. And maybe it'll go away, maybe it won't go away, but that's not the determinant of beauty, either external or internal.
What is your take on suffering? Why do we suffer as human beings?
It's really discouraging. And I say this because our suffering comes from believing that the world is fair, it's just, it's equitable, that that there is a never-ending quantity to life, like we're immortal, and life doesn't show up that way. Life is not fair, equitable, just, nor is it eternal. And every time that we're reminded of that, we suffer. And we suffer because we refuse to accept what is. In terms of personal relationships, what I believe is that if I'm suffering in a relationship, it's because I have expectations. And those expectations are not met. Now, there are two things I can do. I can ask for them to be met, or I can not ask for them to be met. If I never ask for them to be met, I will continue to suffer. Because the other person has no idea what it is I'm wanting. If they are not willing or not able to change it, and I continue to hang on to my wishes rather than accept the fact that they're not able or willing, then I'm going to suffer. And the more I change my expectations away from what I want, remember, I'm trying to feel safe or connected or all those other things we talked about earlier. It's a little discomforting when that person won't give us that. So, the idea is to disconnect my expectations from what I want or what I think I want to what I've got. And you may have experienced this. I'm old enough to have walked out of a doctor's office going, "Oh my God, I'm really glad it's not cancer," and everything else is minor, right? Mm-hmm. I mean. Nothing else matters. My wife has not changed. My car has not changed. My job has not changed. But it doesn't matter because I was trying to hold on to the expectation that I might be dead in 6 months. So that's a really good example of, managing our expectations will determine to a significant degree the amount of pain and suffering that we go through. And it's really hard because, it's a sad story. Life is a sad story. It always ends in death and loss.
Mm-hmm. So true.
And the more we pretend that it doesn't, the more pain we're going to be in.
This leads me back to how we opened the show with a discussion about motivation, and it's as much as I love that we've become a podcast about death. I am interested in what appears to me to be a continuum of motivation, right? On one end, we have this sort of intrinsic motivation where I recognize that I'm suffering, but I recognize it, and I am therefore able to take action and take forward motion on my own behalf. And on the very far other extreme, we have this sort of requiring this extrinsic motivation, which is like, I can't move. I have totally lost to the world and I need an intervention. I have to have the world push me forward and get out of it. And my sense is that we're all somewhere in between these 2 points. But how do you... Well, first of all, is this an apt metaphor? And if so, how do you guide folks to move on this continuum, to move more toward this sort of intrinsic? How do you motivate yourself to change, to see the good in the world, and to start, moving out from under the piano? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. My read on it is that extrinsic motivation, which means motivation coming from the outside world in, has a very limited short-term effect, if any at all. And in fact, the evidence would show that the more confrontation and the more pressure that's put on by the outside world for me to change will slow down or impede my change process. So that's another one of the things that I think that we in America have got all wrong, is that, how long have we been telling people to stop smoking? That didn't work, but raising the price of cigarettes to an astronomical thing has helped. That's part of what's helped. Mm-hmm. Showing them pictures, not telling them to quit, but showing them pictures of what happens to long-term cigarette smokers, that has affected a change. So the idea to building intrinsic change is, how can I be with you in a way that has you get the idea, this would be a really good idea for me, and I'm really ready to do that. And the key is, and this sounds simple again, but I have a whole thing I do around listening, is if I listen to you exquisitely enough, you're going to run into yourself and you're going to confront yourself. And when you confront yourself, you're much more likely to move ahead. And we've all experienced that. At one point in time, something happened on the inside of you that said, I want to do what I do for a living. I want to host podcasts. That's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And typically that did not happen because somebody told you that's what you should do. It was something fired up inside of you. And when that happens, nothing will stop you. Logic, money, time. I mean, it's like you just make it happen because there's this fire burning inside of you.
Amen to all of those things.
Right. Well,
so true.
But if it's extrinsic, then anything will stop you. And so what I say to people who, are having, they're questioning why their clients or why their friends won't change, it's like what I say is they don't get it yet. They're not on fire about it. And giving them more information about how they should be actually will reverse the process or make less likely it's going to happen. So how can we help them fire up about this? And the most significant thing we can do is to listen very, very deeply. There's a difference between hearing what somebody's saying and listening to what they're saying. And in listening to what they're saying, you just enter their world. You don't have an opinion. You do exactly what you're sort of doing on this program. You're saying, well, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that. And you may be sitting there going, this makes no sense at all, right? Mm-hmm. But if you stay with a person long enough, they're going to say to themselves, this makes no sense at all. and they'll keep self-correcting. They'll catch themselves. And they'll believe. Interesting enough, my experience has been, thank you for straightening me out on that. And I'm sitting here thinking, I didn't straighten you out on that. You straightened yourself out when you heard the discrepancies between what you say you want and what you're doing. And that's been my experience. That really, and it's supported by a lot of research over about 30 years, that the most effective interventions, so to speak, are interventions that lead people to their own internal desire to hatch out of that egg and to go from where they are to where they want to be.
That is exactly what I wanted to hear from you, Ted. Thank you very much.
Right.
I feel so much better about everything right now. This has just been a fantastic conversation. Michelle, is there anything we've left out that you want to cover?
No, I think I feel pretty complete. This has been wonderful.
Ted, what you are up to so much. I don't even know how to give you the opportunity to plug everything that you're doing, but what are you most excited about right now in your own work?
Well, I've designed, there are two things. One is I've designed a workshop called Embracing Mortality. Mortality taps us on the shoulder every once in a while. What happened in Orlando, part of what we're dealing with is our own mortality, mm-hmm. right? And the capriciousness of it in some cases. It's not a fair moment. And that's how mortality touches us. And it's really, mortality is my euphemism for death. I've got this character, the Yaqui Indians believe that we have this character sitting on our shoulder, that will tap us on the shoulder. And if we look quickly, from time to time, we'll see its shadow, right? So, Embracing Mortality is a little workshop that I'm doing. And also, I've just taken a job with Creighton University to teach 3 online classes, helping financial professionals develop the human element so that when people come to them for their services, they might more adequately meet the needs of their clients. Because some clients will never see a therapist, they'll never see a minister, but they will see a financial person. And if those financial people can listen to them really well, they can help them have a good life.
Well, this has been absolutely terrific. I will put links to all of these things in our show notes. So on your mobile device, folks, just scroll down. You will see all the links to everything that Ted is doing. His website, tedklontz.com, KLONTZ.com. Ted Klontz, thank you so much for your time and attention today.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
It's been terrific. Michelle, thank you. Always wonderful.
Thank you,
your
Ted
voice.
and Pete. Yes.
Outstanding. On behalf of Michelle Chalfant and Ted Klontz, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll catch you next time right here in the Adult Chair.